Hey college football fans, welcome to episode 48 of Walk It Off with Chappy, an episode I like to call I See You UCLA. So sticking with our Pac-12 theme this week, I want to talk about the UCLA Bruins and what's brewing out there in Westwood as possibly a surprise team to contend and maybe play for the Pac-12 title game this year. So why do I say that? Well, let's start with head coach Chip Kelly. I think he's due for a big season. His time out at Oregon, he won double-digit games every year there. He had some success early on in the NFL. Prior to both of those, he had success at New Hampshire. And even though he's gotten to a slow start in Westwood, last year they went 8-4. And of those 4 losses, 3 of those 4 losses came to teams that won 10 games. Utah, who ended up winning the Pac-12 title and contended and almost beat the Ohio State Buckeyes in the Rose Bowl. Then you had a loss to number 10 Oregon, who won 10 games last season and was right in the thick of the CFP hunt up until mid-November. And then the other loss was to a 10-win Fresno State team by 3 points. Oregon loss was only by 3 as well. So 2 3-point losses, and then the 4th loss came to an 8-win Arizona State team who, believe it or not, was pretty good last season. So the 8-4 record looks or sounds even better than it looks on paper from last season. You look at the schedule and how it sets up this year. So they went 8-4 in a schedule last year. This year's schedule favors them so much more. I mean, you look at how they start off. 3 non-conference games, all at home in the Rose Bowl against Bowling Green, Alabama State, and South Alabama. Now, it should be noted that Chip Kelly is only 2-6 against Group of 5 non-conference opponents while he's been at UCLA. But let's remember that 2 of those 6 losses came to Cincinnati as they were rising toward their stardom. And then they also, like I said, lost to Fresno State last year. So this is by far the easiest non-conference opposition that Chip Kelly has faced in his time at UCLA. So they should start off 3-0. Then they travel to Colorado, a team that on paper they should beat, but it should be noted and warning Bruin fans that the home team in the last 6 games in this series has won. So that game's in Boulder at Folsom Field. Hopefully, though, for Bruin fans, UCLA can win that one easily. Then they come home and take on Washington, where they've won 8 of the last 9 meetings in Pasadena against the Huskies. That bodes well. Then they're home against Utah, a team that they've lost 5 straight games to, and really is many people's pick to win the Pac-12 this year. But again, playing at home, and it should be noted that Utah has Oregon State before UCLA, and then they have to play USC afterwards. So this is a sandwich game, potentially a game that they might be overlooking as they gear up for what could be an undefeated USC team the next week. Then they get a bye before going to Autzen Stadium to take on the Oregon Ducks, who I think will be one of the best teams in the Pac-12 this year. And UCLA has not won at Autzen Stadium since 2004, but in the prior 2 meetings against the Ducks, one of them was last year included, they've only lost by 3 points to Oregon. So they've played them close in the last 2 meetings. They're home against Stanford, where they're 2-1 against the Cardinal in the last 3 meetings. They travel to Arizona State, a team that they lost to for the first time in 5 meetings last year. Although it was at home in the Rose Bowl, they won 4 straight prior to that. Then you finish up the last quarter of the season with Arizona at home. They've beaten the Wildcats 8 of the last 10. USC in the Rose Bowl in that crosstown colored jersey rivalry game. It's beautiful to watch on TV from an aesthetic standpoint, but also a competitive football talent standpoint. They're 3-2 in the last 5 games in Pasadena against the rival Trojans. So that bodes pretty well. And then they finish up at Berkeley to take on the Cal Bears, a team in this, unofficially dubbed Bear Bowl between the Bruins and the Bears. UCLA has won 7 of the last 9 meetings against them. So what type of personnel does UCLA have to potentially win 8, 9, maybe even double-digit games this year? Offensively, they have 2 very good candidates for Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year, starting at quarterback with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He comes back as the last year's top-rated quarterback in the Pac-12, completing 62% of his passes for 2,400 yards, a 21-6 touchdown to interception ratio. He was also very good with his legs, ran the ball for over 600 yards at just under 5 yards a clip, and he had 9 touchdown scampers on the ground. Behind him, Zach Charbonnet, who was the number 2 rusher in the Pac-12, so he's the number 1 returning rusher in the Pac-12. DTR, by the way, is the 3rd returning rusher in the Pac-12 from last year. Charbonnet had 1,169 yards on the ground for a 5.6 yard average, 13 rushing touchdowns. He also caught 24 passes from Mr. Thompson Robinson for an 8-yard average on swings out of the backfield. So he's a little bit of a dual threat. On the outside, flanking these talented stars are guys like Kazmeir Allen, who I think will be one of the most exciting players in the Pac-12 this year and could be a dark horse for Offensive Player of the Year, depending on the touches that he gets, both running the ball and also receiving out in space. He's joined by Duke transfer Jake Bobo, who is a tall, physical target. Kind of reminds me of the Brad Melsby, Danny Farmer days with Bob Toledo and Cade McNown. He was the leading receiver at Duke in pretty much all of his time there in Durham. Transfers over, had an outstanding spring, so good things expected of him. And then that joins with Cam Brown, who returns. He's their leading returning receiver from a year ago. And then they got another transfer from UCF, Titus Mokiao Adamalala, who is a good combination of size, physical stature, but also speed, good route runner as well. So 4 good receivers right off the bat, and then they've got a pretty talented room of tight ends, even though they lost Greg Dulcich, one of my favorite Bruins ever. But there's 4 guys that really can step up and may not be household names, but good pass catchers. And then up front, they only returned 2 starters who were starters for half the season or more last year, but they have guys who do have experience, and they also add in multi-year starter Raekwon O'Neal at one of the offensive tackle positions from Rutgers. Not on campus yet, but when he joins, he's expected to be one of those starters. Then you move to the defensive side of the ball. They're getting a new D coordinator in Bill McGovern, who spent the last good part of a decade in the NFL with the Chicago Bears, the New York Giants, the Philadelphia Eagles. Prior to that, he was a D coordinator for 4 seasons at Boston College. And they are going to get a lot of help from the transfer portal, and they needed it because there were some gaps that had to be filled. But outside of USC, UCLA probably had, in my opinion, the second best transfer portal raking from this past prep season. And I think on the defensive side, they certainly had the best haul of any team in the Pac-12. So it starts up front with the Murphy twins, Grayson and Gabriel Murphy, coming from North Texas, and together they combined for over 24 sacks in the last 3 years. So you're talking about 4 sacks apiece each of the last 3 seasons for these guys. Darius Muasau, who is an all-Mountain West middle linebacker from Hawaii, should step in. He's a tackling machine and just looks like and sounds like one of those typical middle linebackers for the Bruins in their illustrious history. They also got Azizi Hearn, a corner, nickel, safety, kind of a jack of all trades in the secondary. He had 5 pass breakups and 30 stops for the Wyoming Cowboys last season. And then, you know, that's not to mention guys like Gary Smith and Jacob Sykes, interior defensive linemen. They get in the transfer portal. But then you add that on top of returning players like Stephen Blaylock at safety, Bo Calvert, an outside linebacker, rush end type player who should put up some big numbers in this new defense under Bill McGovern. And then there's also Ale Cajo, an inside linebacker who should team up nicely with Darius Muasau. I think both of those guys will play well together and could be a great 1-2 punch on the inside, roaming the middle. This was a defense that caused 21 takeaways last year, which was, I think, 23rd nationally, and they were also 23rd in stopping the run. Now, like I said, they lose a decent chunk of their personnel from last year, but when you add in those transfers that I just mentioned, they should theoretically be as good, maybe even better than the numbers that they posted last season. And then They were a top 25 special teams group last year. Nicholas Barmira is a solid and steady place kicker. He'll also be handling punt duties this year, as Luke Akers has transferred off to Northwestern, but Barmira is a guy who is kind of built and fit to handle both duties. We talked about Kazmir Allen as a great threat skill guy on offense in space. Well, he's just as good in the kick return game. He had about a 27-yard average last season on kick returns and took one to the house. So things are looking good for UCLA. The schedule sets up nicely. I'm officially calling for a 9-3 season, 6-3 in the Pac-12. But again, if they can steal a game against UCLA, or if they can steal a game against Oregon or Utah, and they go with only one conference loss, I think that will be good enough to put them in that Pac-12 title game, and Chip Kelly will be back where many expected him to be when he first took the job in Pasadena. So, do you agree? Do you disagree? UCLA fans, you better be clapping and you better be supporting and spreading this on. But others who might be of opposing fan bases or just general college football fans, how does that resonate with you? And again, I'm just Chappy from Michigan, no real invested stock in the UCLA football program, but I see talent and I recognize talent, and UCLA's got it this year. So let me know what you think. As always, I'm Chappy, having fun, doing what I love, because this is what I know.